Glad to be with you today. My name is Derrick James. I'm Director of Government Affairs for Amtrak in the Midwest, and that obviously includes the great state of Wisconsin. Wanted to just be present to talk to you guys today, give you an update about what's going on at Amtrak, especially in light of the recently passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Talk to you about Amtrak plans, talk to you about our partnership with the state of Wisconsin, our very, very successful partnership with the state of Wisconsin. I think comments that were made earlier today commented on my friend Arun Rao, who is the rail manager for rail passenger programs at Wisconsin DOT. And yes, he is absolutely a dynamo. And you guys have in the state of Wisconsin a very, very accomplished and dedicated public servant there. We certainly enjoy working with Mr. Rao, and he and his team, he and his superiors at the state DOT have his back, and great things are happening with passenger rail in Wisconsin, and we're certainly glad to be a part of that. You guys, many of you have been at this for a very long time, but I always like to just give a really brief primer on Amtrak so people understand sort of where we've been, what we've been through, and how we got to where we are today. As many of you know, Amtrak has just celebrated 50 years of existence. We were created by an act of Congress in 1970 to take over operation of the private freight railroads. I know there was some mention earlier today about Appleton having been on the passenger rail map, and I think I may stand corrected, but I think Appleton may have had service right up until the first day of Amtrak service back in 1971 with Chicago and Northwestern passenger train service up to Green Bay and beyond. Unfortunately, when Amtrak was put together, the U.S. Department of Transportation decided what the initial route map was going to be of new Amtrak service, and the Chicago, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Ashland route was not included, so at that time Ashland lost passenger train service. But that be as it may, we have taken great pains over the last 50 years, especially the last 15 years, to really turn the passenger rail network around. Just prior to the pandemic, we broke a ridership record. We carried 32.5 million customers, and that was in 2019. We serve over 500 destinations across the U.S. And 3 Canadian provinces, bringing in several $billions of revenue annually. Part of that vision for improvements is really doubling down and being better at customer service. We know that folks have a choice when they travel every day, and many of us, we love the sort of pleasure and nostalgia of the train, but for the train to be really successful, it has to be a service that can be utilized by everyday people and frequently. I know there's talk of, we discuss tourist attractions and special events, but the Hiawatha's success comes from everyday people who ride the train regularly. If you go out to I-41, you'll see there's lots of traffic out there. Even on a day like today, it was mentioned, today's not necessarily a work day in the traditional sense, but people are going places. People are going to visit family and friends, they're going on trips, they're going shopping. So the train, we must have service that is able to provide a level of accommodation for folks who want to do all sorts of trips. So we've been committed to improving our service. We also know that the United States, the country is changing, and that we've got a cohort of folks that are here, that are coming along, that are going to be our travelers of the future. And those are the millennials. They're the biggest generation in the U.S., making up a quarter of the population. We know that in general, they like to drive a little bit less. They like to stay connected, and they have until they've been concentrated in urban areas. Of course, we've seen some pretty dramatic changes in the past couple of years dealing with the pandemic and some upheaval. We think those trend lines are still going to be prevalent, that folks like to get together. They like to be together and value those experiences with each other. And they're also more environmentally conscious. And we think that rail brings something to the table with the service that we'd like to see. We think it brings more to the table to attract these new customers. So again, for those who may not be as familiar with us, I indicated that prior to the pandemic, we'd set new ridership records and financial performance. We were well on our way to, in the fiscal year 20, we were expecting to have an operation that required no net operating subsidy. And that's operating subsidy. There will always be capital infrastructure that's needed. I've heard some references to the Northeast Corridor needs a lot of capital dollars, and that is certainly true. But in terms of operating the system, we were getting close to break even. Of course, the pandemic upended that. We need to begin to build the system back and work towards that again. We think that the success that we've had over the past decade or so in getting both federal and state support for Amtrak initiatives, both to operate trains and both to invest in the capital, we think that success in getting policymakers to buy into it is because of the improvements that we've made, not only in service, but in our financial performance. We've started to demonstrate that we can be trustworthy stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And Congress showed that throughout the pandemic in terms of the pandemic relief that they provided us to keep the trains going, even though ridership had dropped off dramatically. And ultimately, in the passage last year of the bipartisan infrastructure law that was signed into existence by President Biden in November, that provides unprecedented funding for passenger rail expansion. So the pandemic, as I mentioned, ridership did plummet during the height of the pandemic. We were carrying as few as 3% of the number of people that we had carried before. We had to take action to manage our finances. That included separations of employees, both voluntary and involuntary. There were pay cuts. And then we reduced services. Not only did we reduce the frequency of services, we reduced train length and we reduced services on board the trains to manage within the dollars that we had. And we're still attempting to claw back from that. Ridership is returning. Prior to the recent Omicron dip, we were at about 70% of pre-pandemic levels in ridership. But our recent numbers show that as we come out of this Omicron wave and mask mandates are lessening and infection rates are in decline, that ridership is coming back, and we're excited. We have been adding services back. I saw in the chat room somebody asked about the Hiawatha services. And this coming week, all 7 daily round trips of the Hiawatha will be back in service again. We have been taking steps to make sure that folks feel comfortable on the train. We've been disinfecting trains at our stations. We've put up plastic barriers on board in the cafe cars. We've required masks. We've made sure that hand sanitizers were available, and our filtration systems were operating at top snuff, if you will. In terms of with our employees, we're at a very high rate of vaccinations for our employees. And for those employees who are not able to get vaccinated, they have to be tested regularly. We've made changes in the travel experience using the technology that's available so that folks can do more touchless booking of tickets. Somewhere north of 90% of our tickets, our customers use non-interactive tools to actually acquire their tickets. Going to the ticket office to purchase a paper ticket from a ticket agent, from a customer service rep, is very much in the minority of how most customers acquire their tickets. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to have employees at facilities to answer questions of customers and to assist folks, but now they have more time to do that because they're not handling tickets as folks move to our mobile app and to online tools and by phone. So I heard that one of your members made mention of travel going out to the East Coast, and if Amtrak has somebody that plans for the future. Absolutely, we do. We are bulking up our planning team. We have a vice president of marketing and planning who has overseen the development of our Amtrak Connects Us plan, which is our plan for growth. This is the plan that we begin to present to the Congress over the last year and a half or so. Mayor Woodford made a comment. He indicated that he was one of the signees to the Mayor of Green Bay's letter to the congressional delegation saying, we more money for rail. And we thank the civic leaders in the Fox Valley for doing that. They joined mayors and business community and advocates and environmentalists from all over the country over the last year, making the case that if the Congress was going to pass legislation to bolster the American economy to pull us out of this pandemic, that it should include unprecedented dollars for rail. And it did happen. The infrastructure bill that the president signed in November has $66 billion in it for rail and Amtrak infrastructure. As he said there, it's a once in a lifetime generation to really pump money into this mode to get us to where we need to be as a nation with not only a high quality air and highway system, but a high quality rail system as well. So that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that's the official name of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It had $550 billion in new infrastructure spending and $66 billion of it for rail. Most of the money, or about half of the dollars, will go to the Federal Railroad Administration to be administered as grants to states and Amtrak to bulk up and expand passenger rail service. The other half of the money will go, of that $66 billion, will roughly go to Amtrak for investment in infrastructure that we actually own. So that's stations like Union Station in Chicago, or railroad track that we own, like in the state of Michigan or around New Orleans, or of course the Northeast Corridor, to upgrade our technology, to continue to invest in stations to make all of our stations accessible. We're spending about $125 million a year on station upgrades. Those of you who in Wisconsin, if you've been to the Portage station, will see that a brand new platform was constructed at Portage that is length of train and that allows for smooth boarding and is well lit. Same thing is coming to other stations like Toma and Columbus. Here's not to get too wonky for you, but for those of you who are interested, here is the breakdown in the appropriations for rail in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Amtrak's funding comes to us in two different categories. It comes as capital funding, and then it comes as operating funding. The appropriations in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is primarily for capital expenditures. And capital is to build track, upgrade stations, buy rolling stock. We are going to, on the left column there, you can see $30 billion is allocated for funding of passenger rail in the Northeast Corridor. $6 billion of it will go to Amtrak for things like upgrading catenary, upgrading stations. And then below that, you'll see an orange box. That's a reference to one of the federal grant programs, the Fed-State Partnership for Intercity Passenger Rail. That's going to be funded at not more than $24 billion. Those are the funds that will be available if states and Amtrak go to the feds seeking grant dollars. Since the majority of usage on the Northeast Corridor is actually not Amtrak, but commuter rail authorities, that's why that partnership is really important, because any upgrades to the Northeast Corridor not only benefit Amtrak trains like the Acela and the Northeast Regional, they benefit commuter trains that use it around Washington, and Philadelphia, and Baltimore, and New York, and Boston, and Haven. So the states have a role to play as well, so that the feds aren't the only ones spending money on the Northeast Corridor. In the center there, there's some multi-purpose funding. There's $3 billion set aside to eliminate grade crossings, which helps passenger rail immensely, also helps freight rail. And then below that, there's what's called CRISI. That's the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant Program. That is also available to freight railroad expansion as well. What's most important to us in the Midwest is the column on the right that says dedicated NN funding. NN means the national network. That's what Congress designates all of the Amtrak network outside of the Northeast Corridor. $16 billion will come directly to Amtrak. Again, that'll be for us to buy new trains, upgrade stations, and upgrade our technology and our maintenance facilities and the like. But what's really key for services like what we're talking about that would serve Appleton, Green Bay, expansions that we want to see to Eau Claire and Madison, there's the Fed-State Partnership for Intercity Rail. Over the next 5 years, there is guaranteed funding of at least $12 billion. Those are funds that will be available for states and Amtrak to apply for to expand and add new passenger train routes on the national network. And we want we want to partner with Wisconsin to add new routes that I will show you in the state of Wisconsin. So, talking about our vision for the future, and I talked about Amtrak Connects Us. You can go online and actually look up Amtrak Connects Us and see the vision that we would like to see in terms of expanded rail. We want to bring passenger train service to 160 new communities. That's on top of the 500 that we also serve. Those new communities include Appleton, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, and Green Bay. We think that the expansion of passenger rail service will deliver $195 billion in additional economic opportunity. Again, I heard in the discussion this morning talking about the subsidy. Yes, some of these services will require some operating support to cover the difference between what it costs to run the train and the actual ticket revenue that we bring in, but that's okay. You got to change the language. To investment in passenger rail is exactly that. It's an investment. You may invest some taxpayer dollars to run the trains, but the economic impact that the additional mobility brings to your communities and to your state over and above surpasses the small amount of taxpayer support that's needed. So just like Interstate 41 does not make a profit, but I bet you that all of the businesses, the hotels, and the communities that are accessed by that benefit economically because of the state investment in that road. And the same thing happens for passenger rail. The Milwaukee business community understands that. That's why they are so foursquare with the legislature behind the operating and capital support that's needed for the Hiawatha services. So they get it. Investments in some government services do actually generate economic return for the consumer. Also, of course, we'll generate many additional jobs, not only at Amtrak, but in the supplier industry and in industries that will receive that from folks that are traveling to conduct business. And of course, rail is much more energy efficient and better for the environment. The lens through which we looked at our plan for growth was looking at where the population is in the United States. Of course, the Great Lakes region, a lot of folks, it's my home, it's your home. Population has been stable to slowly growing, but still millions of people live in the Great Lakes, and we think we can deliver a lot more service to be of value. But also there are parts of the country where they weren't as populous when Amtrak was founded 50 years ago, and we're still running just a few trains in places like Texas and Georgia and Arizona. We think that there's room to dramatically grow the value and the presence of Amtrak in those places by adding new trains in places like Texas and Florida and Georgia and Arizona. So again, I talked about the new communities, we want to add 39 new routes. We want to enhance 25 of the existing routes like the Hiawatha service and add stations all over the country so that passenger rail becomes not something that folks think about maybe as an afterthought, but it becomes, hey, I have a trip to take. I think let me look and see if the train is there. And if the services are there, if the frequency is there, more folks will ride the train. So Great Lakes region I talked about, it's my home, it's your home. Here's the map of the proposal that we would like to see. This is our vision initially for expansion that we'd like to see in the Midwest. The black lines represent the existing Amtrak network. You can see they're going through Wisconsin, of course, the Hiawatha service, and then heading off towards Columbus, Portage, and La Crosse. There's the once-a-day Empire Builder. The gold lines represent, the gold overlays on the black lines represent routes that we already have corridor-style services that we want to add and enhance those services. So Chicago to St. Louis, Chicago to Carbondale, Chicago to Milwaukee, to Chicago Grand Rapids, and on. We want to add additional train service on those routes so there are departures throughout the day, making the train a real viable and convenient option. The light blue lines represent routes that we do not serve today, yet we would like to add service. So there's your Fox Valley service there through Fond du Lac, Oshkosh, Appleton, and Green Bay. You can also see, as indicated, we want to extend service over to Watertown with additional stops. I'm sorry, over to Madison with additional stops in Watertown and Economawalk or possibly Pewaukee, as well as The Eau Claire region, Eau Claire, Chippewa Falls, and Menominee, those are growing regions of your state that we think quality rail service makes sense. And then let's not forget our friends up at the Twin Ports, Chicago to Duluth, with a stop at Superior. So this is the route network that we'd like to see. This is the route network that we want to partner with these states to go after those federal funds. Because again, the growth of these routes will depend on partnerships with the states. The federal government will not give the money just over to Amtrak. They will give it to us in partnership with the states to develop these routes. We've had success, as you guys know, in several regions. Of course, the Hiawatha service is a great success. Arun and his team have worked with us to build that route up with 7 round trips a day. We are working with Canadian Pacific on what's going to be needed to take that up to 10 trains a day. The state of Virginia is another aggressive state in terms of expanding passenger rail service with additional frequencies coming to Roanoke, which we just started new service at a few years ago, as well as to Norfolk with new frequencies to Newport News, and expansion to the western part of the state to a place called Christiansburg and Blacksburg, where I think Virginia Tech is located. So those are just some examples of successful partnerships. So Amtrak continues to invest. We are, with the dollars that we've already had, so this is with funds that we had, we are buying 83 new train sets for use in the Northeast and connected state-supported services. Those trains will be primarily diesel powered. There will be options to have some trains that are dual powered, either with catenaries for operating under wires or battery powered for once they leave, once the batteries are sufficiently charged. So again, the green option there. There's an option with the manufacturer to actually buy additional train sets over and above the 83 train sets that we're ordering, and that is to accommodate expected growth that we'd like to see in partnership with other states. Of course, we've got our new Acela train sets that we're testing that we hope to have in service once business travel returns next year. Those trains will have the capability of going 165 miles per hour on sections of the corridor that we're able to upgrade to that speed. And of course, I mentioned millennials love, sustainability and climate is important to them. You have less environmental impact when you're traveling by train. The mayor mentioned that. You reduce your emissions, you're reducing fuel, which is so important in this era of sort of unstable fuel prices. Safety is important to us. All of our system is operating with PTC on it, or PTC equivalents, and that includes our routes that operate over the freight railroad system. And we are making enhancements to the service. Those enhancements will keep coming. I think you may have seen we announced that we're refreshing the interiors on all of our long distance trains. This is temporary because we fully expect that we're going to be putting together a team to start to chart out what is the next replacement for our superliners. The superliners, the first orders of those came in the 1970s. It's about time for them to be retired. We're continuing to upgrade our stations. We're making enhancements to our food service. We would like to continue to expand the freshly onboard prepared food services that exist on our western long distance trains to some of our eastern long distance trains. So, and then of course the technology that I talked about, new quick track machines are being deployed across the system, our mobile technology, to really allow the customer to sort of take charge of their trip. So that's a picture there. I think mention was made that a couple of weeks ago, we announced that all the funding was in place for the TCMC service. That's the media event that we had at the La Crosse Amtrak station. I'm not in the picture because I'm taking the picture, but the tall gentleman on the left there is the president and CEO of Amtrak, Stephen Gardner. To his right, the African-American gentleman is the vice president of operations for CP. And then, of course, the gentleman speaking at the podium is your Wisconsin DOT Secretary, Craig Thompson. So quite a celebratory event. It was great to be there. Oh, these are some good questions. Excellent. All right. All right, so I see, when will the Hiawatha trains to Chicago receive the new cars? Arun and I talked about that while he was trying to dial in, and he indicates this summer. That's about as specific as we want to get. There are some tweaks that need to be made to the rolling stock. So we expect to have the new venture cars. And so for those who don't know, under a previous grant from the federal government, the Midwestern states received a grant of, I think it was around $140 million to purchase 88 new passenger coaches to re-equip the corridor services radiating out of Chicago, including the Hiawatha. The order ultimately was fulfilled by Siemens Company of Sacramento, and those cars are being delivered. Many of them are in Chicago or at our Indianapolis facility, getting their tweaks addressed. Some of the cars have been tested on the Chicago-St. Louis service, but in answer to that question, this summer you should start to see the new venture cars deployed. These cars have much bigger picture windows. They have a lot more plug-ins at your seat. They have more bike racks. They have a larger business class section, and they ride really, really smooth. I've been on a couple of the test trains, and the ride quality was just amazing, and the Wi-Fi is super fast. So looking forward to that. I see a question here about the shuttle to Madison. Yeah, right now there is the Lamers Bus Company, I think operates intercity bus service between Madison and Green Bay with a stop at the Columbus Amtrak station. There is a schedule that is paid for using what's called 5311 funds. These are federal funds that pass through to the state that the state can use to provide rural transit service. Unfortunately, at last check, that shuttle service only works to connect with Amtrak in one direction. So it's not fully usable for round trips. Now, and of course, the challenge being that the Empire Builder going from the west to the east, the timekeeping isn't at the level that we would like to see it. So it's difficult to have a interline bus service connect with the train because there are other people on the bus who want to get where they want to go if the train isn't running on time. I do know that Wisconsin DOT would like to look at establishing a dedicated shuttle service once the TCMC, that's the Twin Cities Milwaukee Chicago service starts at some point, maybe not right at the beginning, but that's something that we will work on with the state to establish a dedicated shuttle service between Columbus and Madison for that train. I know there's a lot of credit that goes to Wisconsin DOT for the vibrancy of the rail program, but like us, there are only so many there's only so much human capacity to get all this stuff done. I know the state has been really focused on making sure that the Milwaukee to Green Bay interline bus service is successful, and it is doing well. It is doing better and better. It's really building a base of customers to support rail service, which we would like to see. So I see Amtrak extension to Green Bay would also open up the Upper Peninsula and northern Wisconsin to more potential riders. Absolutely. I think many of you might know that one of the interline services that connects with Amtrak at Milwaukee is a bus that goes all the way up, I think, to Houghton. And that is a 5311 service. Funding is provided to keep that bus going because it provides rural connectivity and it does connect with the Amtrak system. So in theory, more bus service to Green Bay makes access to the Upper Peninsula and northern Wisconsin even easier because we know folks will drive from pretty far to get to passenger train service. We need much better comprehensive bus service from regional hubs to Amtrak stations. How are these links included in current and future planning? Some current connections require very long wait times or are not well aligned with arrivals and departure times. Yeah, absolutely. The challenge is that many folks don't realize that, there are about 500 stations in the Amtrak system. And on top of that, there are about 400 additional locations that you can access Amtrak trains through interline connections with bus companies. Most of those connections are places where we have researched and worked with the bus company where they already have an existing route that just happens to be running. So they're already carrying customers, and we work with the bus operator to have that bus stop at the Amtrak station when it makes sense, when their bus schedule happens to coordinate with the Amtrak schedule. So it's oftentimes happenstance because the bus company their primary feed, especially for a lot of these regional carriers, is the larger Greyhound system. So that's where the money really is for them. So if they happen to pass an Amtrak station on the way, we can convince them to stop. If the schedule works, that's great. It doesn't always work, and so therefore you end up with sometimes times that are misaligned. The example that I gave earlier, the Madison to Green Bay Lamers bus, is designed to connect with lots of buses down in Madison. It doesn't necessarily work for the train. How you fix that is by adding more trains. And when you have more trains, you have more customers, and that drives the demand, and hopefully we can get the bus companies to adjust their schedules to meet more trains. And we can also set up dedicated bus services where we're not just appending to an existing bus connection, but we're actually buying the bus, and the bus is dedicated to the train, so that whatever the train schedule is, the bus will meet that. And the example of that is Milwaukee, Fond du Lac, Oshkosh, Appleton, Green Bay. Amtrak and Wisconsin DOT buy those buses, so the bus, that's why the bus schedule is so coordinated with the train, because the only people who are on the bus primarily are folks who are connected to Amtrak. And so the more train passengers we have, the more we can justify the financial outlay to actually purchase the bus, because we'll know we have enough people riding the bus to cover the cost. So maybe a little wonky there, but that's what happens when you get into passenger rail. Let's see. Derrick, we need our noses and mouths back. The true experience of riding Amtrak is enjoy the smells, have conversations, and breathe the air. I appreciate that comment. Let's see.
Derrick, we got a couple of questions here in our conference room, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Deb Solsky. I'm the Community Development Director for Washington County, Wisconsin. And I just had a couple of questions. I see that the proposed route from Milwaukee to Green Bay stops in a couple places that are very close to each other, but there's no stops in Washington County. How is that determined, the actual stations?
Help me understand, again, Washington County, is that immediately north and west of Milwaukee County?
Yeah, that's Slinger, Hartford, West Bend. It's northwest.
Okay, all right. Stops are determined based on what the expected ridership will be, with a balance. We need to, since every time a train stops, it engenders additional cost, because it lengthens the route, it lengthens the length of time that the train is running. So more fuel, more labor cost. So a stop needs to, the amount of ridership that we derive from a particular station stop needs to either match that or bring in enough revenue to offset the additional cost from actually making the stop. So we like to stop at sort of larger communities. We also like to have stops of at least 30 miles apart, but sometimes depending on the population, there could be a little closer than that. West Bend, Slinger, forgive me, I thought I knew my Wisconsin territory. Is that south of Fond du Lac?
It is south of Fond du Lac. I believe the train is proposed to go right through Slinger.
Okay, all right. One of the things that Amtrak, our charter is to run intercity passenger rail. Once you're getting closer to a larger city, you're looking more at commuter rail. And the ridership that would come from Washington County, would those customers be more interested in getting to Milwaukee, or would they be more interested in getting to Chicago? Those are some of the factors that play in. Now, again, if we think that, one of the things that we'd like to see is we'd like to see a stop in Milwaukee, because we think a lot of Milwaukee folks would hop on the train, those who are maybe going to business in Chicago. So Slinger could be a possibility. I think one of the things I'll relay to Arun when he and I talk is that there was this inquiry, because it might make sense. I'll add that to our list of discussion points. And I would suggest that when you talk to your contacts at Wisconsin DOT, say the same thing. Say that you're interested in being a stop if the state of Wisconsin wants to proceed and move forward with the Green Bay extension.
I also have another question. How fast the line to Green Bay, how fast are you anticipating that going?
We want to see all of these trains running at least 79 miles per hour. That's the maximum speed limit for passenger trains without a special enhanced signal system that allows them to go faster. We think that in order for the train to be competitive, it needs to be as fast as driving.
And what is the time frame for actual implementation?
It's up to the state of Wisconsin. Since the federal grant dollars that are available are competitive grants that will come to states that decide to compete for them, it's going to be up to Wisconsin if they decide to advance this corridor. In theory, once a corridor has been selected, once a state wants to develop a corridor, depending on how much infrastructure work is needed, what the cooperation is with the freight railroad that we'd be running on, station development, you're looking at 6 to 10 years for development of a corridor. And of course, there's the environmental process that we have to go through as well.
All right, thank you.
All right, Derrick, we have a couple questions here in the room.
Hello, my name is Paul Stino, and I'm with one of the TV stations out of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I appreciate you taking my question. My question is, what's the likelihood that we actually see the implementation of a railway from Milwaukee to Green Bay? Can you kind of outline the process that would have to happen for this to be implemented? And then as far as kind of the cost of who absorbs the cost for a project like this, can you break that down as well? And I really, really appreciate your time answering my question. Thank you.
Which TV station was that?
I'm with CBS affiliate out of Green Bay, Wisconsin.
All right, so the process is the federal government right now is putting together the rules for the grant program. I mentioned in my presentation the federal state partnership for passenger rail, which is funded at $12 billion over the next 5 years. That is the pot of money that will be drawn from to develop new passenger train routes on the national network, or places like the Fox Cities corridor here to Green Bay. Starting in sometime in May, the federal government will do a solicitation and reach out to states and other government entities and ask who is interested in having their corridors added to a corridor network map that the federal government is going to put together. The federal agency is the Federal Railroad Administration. And so over the next year after this solicitation begins, the feds are going to receive those solicitations from states. We would like Wisconsin to partner with us and say, yes, let's add these corridors in Wisconsin to that national map that the feds are putting together. The feds are then going to finalize that map with the routes that where they've received an expression of interest from states around the country and Amtrak. And then at that point, probably a little more than a year from now, the federal government will start to issue what are called NOFOs, which stands for Notice of Funding Opportunity, where they will indicate in the Federal Register that funds are available for states and passenger rail operators to apply for to begin to develop corridors. And if this particular route or any route is awarded based upon selection criteria that the federal government will develop, and these will be competitive. There will be states partnering with us and maybe some other passenger rail services all over the country to develop corridors. The $12 billion that's been identified is not enough to do the entire Amtrak vision. It will get us started. The hope is that after this bill has expired in 5 years, that the Congress will continue to step up and provide grant funds for passenger rail development going forward, just like the federal government does this every year for highways and for aviation. This program is hopefully the beginning of an annual program that includes funding for rail so that we can develop and build out our network. So back to once the feds have made a decision on which routes will be included, and they indicate that funds are available and entities like states and Amtrak apply for those funds, in theory, probably the first application will be for planning dollars. We've only done sort of a high level analysis of that this route could be a really good route, but we're going to want to get into, you're going to want to start to do some detailed planning to determine what is going to be the actual cost of upgrading the railroad that runs through these communities now, so that it can accommodate fast passenger trains and still allow the freight business to move their freight trains. How much are the stations going to cost to develop? How much is it going to cost to acquire passenger trains? And then, of course, the environmental process, the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act. So community outreach, getting feedback from folks, and going through that process to make sure that the passenger rail project is not injurious and actually benefits the environment. So once that planning process is completed and we've got a document, then we can start to go after the actual capital funds. Also, there will be subsequent NOFOs, notices of funding opportunity, where the states and the passenger rail operator, once they know what the actual cost is going to be, will actually start to go after those dollars. If the route is going to cost X tens of millions of dollars to develop, we'd like to apply for those funds from the federal government. A key piece here, though, is that the feds have set this up like they have with a lot of other programs, that there is a local match that's required. So that the federal government's not going to pay for the whole thing. They're going to require that the locals come up with the match, and the locals could be local communities. It could be the state legislature in Wisconsin has to come up with a local match. We just announced a couple weeks ago, as I mentioned, that we're about to start new passenger train service between Chicago and the Twin Cities. Very similar process. Amtrak is putting in $5 million for that project. Uncle Sam is putting in $32 million. Amtrak, the state of Wisconsin is putting in almost $7 million, and the state of Minnesota is putting in $10 million. It's ultimately a $53 million project. So in theory, that is how any new service to Green Bay would come about, is that you'd apply for federal funds, match it with state funds appropriated from the legislature. The state may require that the communities chip in other places that has been, the community provides the train station. So, and so once those dollars are achieved, once the grants are awarded, then you work with the freight railroad to actually start to build the infrastructure, adding any additional capacity that's needed, like passing sidings, new signals, fixing of track, and then procuring trains. So I know that's kind of a long answer, but it's an involved process.
Thank you. This is Larry Root at the meeting in Appleton, Wisconsin. The question came up here on the floor, and it comes out of something that President John Parkins said. When we talk to our legislatures and appeal to them to get our share, to get our state funding for passenger rail, we find that talking about jobs is a huge attention getter. How can Amtrak help us to do that?
We are certainly willing to join you on your visits when you go meet with legislators. I spend time in Madison meeting with legislators as well. And, you know, a couple of years ago, the state passed its capital bonding bill, and it included $35 million in it for passenger rail. And I think part of the success of the legislature putting that money in there is because the Hiawatha service has been so successful. Prior to the pandemic, we were well on path to needing, for the fiscal year that was coming up, that the pandemic struck us in, we were expecting to need very little operating support to run the Hiawathas. The fares and the ridership were doing so well that it was almost covering the operating support for the train. And that really impressed the legislators. You can, if you invest in the service, meaning upgrade the track and the stations and provide quality trains, people will ride and you won't have to subsidize. What I've discovered as I work across the Midwest is that legislators get that government needs to invest in its physical infrastructure to allow the private sector economy to work. It is the operating subsidy that they have a challenge with, but that they are okay with that if they can see that the service that's being provided actually juices the economy. as an example, and you guys may be able to go online and get this, the state of Missouri DOT just did an economic analysis of their Amtrak service that they spend like $10 million a year on subsidizing passenger train service across the state of Missouri, but it returns $250 million annually in economic activity in terms of, you know, additional businesses, stays in hotels, taxes, procurement, wages. So yeah, transit sometimes requires operating support, but it ends up churning, those dollars churn back into the local economy and brings back way more than it's costing the taxpayers. And I think that's the message that you need to carry forward. And we can help you carry that. I would print out the Missouri DOT economic analysis and take it with you so that they can see that. Once we update our fact sheets, it'll show how much money we spend on Wisconsin manufacturers every year just to keep the Amtrak system going. Wisconsin is a manufacturing state, and we spend a lot of money with companies in Wisconsin on maintaining our equipment. So I'm willing to join you if you guys have meetings. I'll come up to Madison.
Just one thing that you heard from him that sometimes scares people, and that was the local community and the station. So talking about tourist opportunities and that, this year, drive out to a place called Wisconsin Dells. And back when the Milwaukee Road was bankrupt, a train went off the track and demolished the station. And of course, Amtrak wasn't going to build a station. And so the community built a station, but not just going to the town and say, give me the money. Volunteers built that station.
Doing some of the physical work. They had a special drawing made of a historic station. They sold them for $100 each, and they built it, and it gets used. And it gets volunteer staffed. So when you think of things and people bring up, well, it's going to cost a lot because, you know, Oshkosh has got to build a station, and who's going to staff it if we want to have a station agent. Take a look at Wisconsin Dells. It's quite a story, and it's been years that it's been very successful. Some of us use it every now and then.